Welcome along to UPAD Towers here in London, and one of the trending topics on Property Tribes is landlords talking about deposit replacement schemes. And I've come along to UPAD because CEO James Davis is not only company owner and founder, but also a landlord yourself, James. And it's very interesting because I think we should point out, in the interests of transparency, you're a commercial partner of Property Tribes, but also we are partnered with Zero Deposit for our deposit replacement scheme partner, as are you. Other deposit replacement schemes are available, of course, but I think, I wanted to talk to you about the whole concept of deposit replacement. When you first heard about it, what did you think?
So, thank you for the introduction. I think this is an unsung, quiet, off-the-cuff opportunity for landlords to have the competitive edge over all others. Certainly, I think you get the early adopters on PT, and I think this is something that can really work. And the reason being is that most tenants have to find that second deposit before they get their first one back. And now that sums involved are sort of £2,000 in London, £1,000 outside of London, we're talking quite a lot of money for people just to have lying around, which people just don't these days. So I think it helps with the mobility of the rental market, and therefore it allows you to have more tenants that are potentially interested in your property than you otherwise would do. So I think it's an opportunity to have more leads, more tenant leads, more choice about who moves into your property, which is just a better thing for all landlords concerned.
No, totally agree. Now, obviously, landlords, the traditional kind of maybe old school landlord likes this idea of the cash deposit. They like the tenant to have skin in the game. When you're talking to your UPAD landlords, as your guys are in the background, how are you educating them about, that the zero deposit option is definitely worth considering?
So the fact that I've been doing this for 20-ish years, which is really scary. When we both started doing this, it was the case that deposits from tenants came into our own bank account. There weren't the three government schemes that existed, and it was almost our call about what we gave back to the tenant. And I think there was probably a belief back then that you were lucky as a tenant if you got your deposit back. There was no control over it in any way, shape or form. Obviously that's changed, but I think a lot of people that have been a landlord for as long as we could still have that mindset. And we've got to remember that a tenant's deposit is not your own money, it's your tenant's. You have no automatic right to it, and should you want to make a claim, it has to go to adjudication at one of the government schemes, like TDS, for example, and you've got to be able to prove that the property was returned in a different condition to what it was originally let. So let's remember, it's not our money, it's not £2,000 coming straight into our bank account and for us to decide whether we give it back or not. That does not exist. I think once we've understood that the marketplace doesn't work like that, actually the zero deposit option, where you get 6 weeks protection compared to the 5 weeks through the traditional schemes since the tenant fee ban came in earlier in the year, it's a no-brainer just on that fact alone which one you would go with, because you actually get more protection than you do through the current schemes. So I see a shining light ahead for zero deposits.
No, it's interesting you say that, and I've come to that conclusion myself as well, actually. I've actually used zero deposit myself on a 4-bed house in Manchester that I've had a lot of issues with, and it worked very, very well for the tenant as well, because the lady was moving from Scotland and couldn't get her deposit out in time to put it through to my property, so we went for the zero deposit option, and the whole thing was very, very smooth. I think what and I'm going to play devil's advocate again here, if you don't mind, is, I've heard some landlords say, well, if they can't afford the deposit, then maybe they shouldn't be moving into the property. Now, you've got a very good answer to that.
God, that's putting me on the pedestal. I think we've got to be aware of how the marketplace works. Whether somebody's got the money for the deposit or not has no bearing on whether they can afford it. We've only got to look at, say, the car market, where so much of it is a tiny deposit and then you're sort of paying monthly. So I think we need to park the idea that whether somebody has the money for a deposit or not has a bearing on whether they can afford it. The key thing all of us as landlords should be looking at is, what is that person's take-home pay, and is the rent that is being charged or what they're offering no more than a third of what they're taking home. The second it's more than a third, it sort of gets into danger zone about whether they can actually afford that property or not. And you may want to dig a bit deeper in terms of other financial commitments they've got to check that they can actually afford this property. But what proportion of someone's take-home pay is going on rent should be the key driver for any landlord, not whether they've got £2,000, £5,000 saved up. That's between them and their parents, and what safety net they should have in life.
No, I think that's such a good point. I think the other interesting thing that makes deposit replacement very attractive to me as a landlord is that it's not subject to the same legislation and regulation as the cash deposit schemes. So it's actually very smooth to set up. You don't have to worry about protecting it, prescribed information, all those little details that can really trip a landlord up if they haven't done it correctly within the correct timeframes.
So you're absolutely right, Vanessa. And I think the way that zero deposit works is it speeds up that process. And it's just a hassle factor for all of us landlords that once you've found a tenant, and actually for them too, just speeds up that process, reduces the hassle factor, and just allows us to get on with the process. Which I think is just a really win-win for all parties concerned.
It is, because if tenants can move more easily around the private rented sector, have more fluidity, it actually will reduce voids. And I think we're hearing a lot of stories come out of lettings agents that it's really helping tenants move, and that helps landlords.
Yeah, I think there's two big trends that we see in so many different markets. One is speed and one is hassle. Yeah. And the faster something can happen with the least amount of hassle, it's just a win. It's what we all do. And you can look in any market in any way, shape or form, whether it's online shopping and a certain website I order everything from. It's because it's easy and it has no hassle. And when I want to refund something because it's not the right size, it just happens. Yeah. And I think the same is in this particular space. And I think this marketplace, especially businesses like Zero Deposit, they tick those boxes of speeding things up and getting rid of some of the hassle that goes with being a landlord. Therefore, I'm a fan of supporting that, wearing my landlord hat.
Yes. So we've talked about you as a landlord. Obviously, we're here at UPAD Online Letting Agent. You were quite an early adopter of Zero Deposit. Are you, when your staff are speaking to landlord prospects, are you offering everybody the zero deposit option and giving them a little kind of highlights education about it? Yeah,
I think we were one of the founding partners with Zero Deposit when they first launched, and for me it was quite a simple thing. A lot of people talk about you've got to have your property advertised on sites like Zoopla and Rightmove, which is a no-brainer. But we're all aware that when you do a search for any particular postcode, there's 10, 20 properties that come up. And I think the bit for an agent is how do you make your property stand out over all the other 9 or 19 properties that are also being advertised. We've talked a lot in the past about doing your own viewing, saying that you manage the property yourself, puts you in pole position because 9 out of 10 tenants would rather meet the landlord than anybody else on a viewing. But if you can say that there is a zero deposit or an alternative deposit option available, you're going to get more inquiries from those people that don't have 2K or what have you saved up. And it's all a bit of a numbers game. The more leads you can get, the quicker you're going to let your property and reduce your void periods. But also you've got that choice. You won't feel like you have to go with a certain person that you're not 100% comfortable with. And I think we've all been there. If you've got 3 people to choose from, that's perfect as far as I'm concerned. And this ticks a box to fit in with that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It is early days for deposit replacement schemes in the private rented sector, but can you see that sometime in the future they may well become the norm, and that the kind of traditional cash deposit will kind of fade into the background?
So I think we need to park this idea of physically having money from a tenant in our own bank account and there's no deposit schemes that exist. That's years and years ago. And we've got to remember that the economy is very much a cashless one at the moment, with contactless and so on and so forth. So why would the same not happen within the deposit side of the rental market? And the key bit for me to sort of think forward is not just the fact that there's 6 weeks rather than 5 weeks protection, and that it's just easier for tenant mobility, they don't have to find that second deposit, but they're backed by TDS. So if there is a dispute, and TDS, somebody we work with at UPAD for years, is a tried and tested formula. If there is a dispute, that process just kicks in, and regardless how a tenant and landlord come through to TDS, whether it's through a traditional scheme or through zero deposit, it makes no difference. It's exactly the same process. So I have sort of a peace of mind that in 12 months' time, when my tenancy comes to an end, that should there be an issue, it's absolutely irrelevant what deposit scheme I came through, because it's the same outcome at the end, if that makes sense.
Yes, no, absolutely. Well, thank you very much, James, for joining me talking about deposit replacement. It is something that is being discussed on Property Tribes a great deal. And, you know, I think it's definitely something that landlords should educate themselves about and understand, because as we've been discussing, there are actually many, many benefits, and it is the way that things are going.
Yeah, as a landlord, you've got to have the competitive edge. You're competing against other properties, other landlords, and I think zero deposit is certainly an additional thing you should have in your bag to make you stand out from all of the others. That, plus other things like advertising the property yourself, doing your own viewings, having awesome photographs, it's all going to put you in good stead to minimise any void periods. There's plenty of more top tips on PT.
Well, thank you so much. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this interview about deposit replacement schemes, and I'll put some links at the bottom of this thread where you can join some other discussions where the Property Tribes community has been discussing this very interesting and trending topic. And if you are watching this video on YouTube, I do invite you to subscribe, hit the notifications button, and ideally do jump across to propertytribes.com. That is where our discussions are hosted. But for now, it's Vanessa and James signing off from UPAD SETI in UPAD Towers in London. Thanks for watching.